The world is changing, and it's changing fast. We're exiting a period of incredible growth and relative stability, where after the most destructive war in human history, the U.S. rose to power as the global leader.
The American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
And as that leader, the U.S. created new structures like NATO and the World Trade Organization. They established rules about trade, rules about economics, rules about justice, rules that they based on Western philosophical values, now being projected around the globe by a country with an astounding amount of alliances and military hardware. For a time, another great empire challenged that order, operating with a different set of rules, a different set of values and philosophies, trading with their own bloc and working with their own alliances. But it couldn't last. The collapse of the Soviet Union in the 90s left the US and their rich allies as the sole setters of the rules, the holders of the power. So the U.S. doubled down, and their system of liberal values, democracy, and free trade spread and fortified throughout the world. But when you're the global leader, when you're the one who sets all the rules, you get to decide when you follow your own rules, and when you don't. Being the global superpower has turned more into being the global policeman. Over these last 75 years, the U.S. has been known to violate the values, norms, and ideals that it built the whole global system off of. Cozying up to strongman dictators, throwing out democratically elected governments, fueling regional wars, and generally trying to stamp out communism across the globe. And anyone who didn't want to play by America's rules was cast out as an insane pariah, in need of regime change.
The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons for over a decade.
And yet, despite this double game the U.S. has played, this system has been a part of the most peaceful period of human history. Major empires don't fight each other like they used to. And a major reason is because they came to understand that getting in line with the American-led system would mean economic opportunity and growth. It wasn't worth a war. Fighting against this system often meant destruction and losing deals for all sides. This peace was also helped by the existence of the most powerful weapons ever invented, which great powers didn't dare use on each other. The American-led system has meant stability and an incredible amount of trade, leading to a dramatic reduction in global poverty. But that era is coming. The U.S.-led order. China, which until recently was the most populous country on Earth, has risen to become the second largest economy and world's largest military based on active forces. And more, China sees the U.S. as an unfair policeman of the global order, only holding to the rules that benefit them. And this projection of values and philosophies from the West to the leaders in China, this looks a lot like the modern-day version of colonialism. They see this hypocritical American empire, drunk on power that they've had since 1945, an America that is increasingly defensive because it's in decline, with its broken politics, divided people, and a complacency with their spot at the top. So China is building a competing system. In March 2023, China's leader Xi Jinping announced his Global Civilization Initiative, where he stated that countries must, quote, refrain from imposing their own values or models on others, and refrain from stoking ideological confrontation. So instead of the hypocritical colonialism of the U.S. imposing their human rights and democracy around the world, his system would be transactional, stripping away the veil of what he views as a hypocritical, rules-based order that is built to basically benefit one group. The Chinese system would be built on common interests, beneficial deals, and opportunistic alliances, not purported philosophical values. And unlike decades past, China now has the military and the money to make it happen, to ignore the rules of the global superpower and to make their own, to engage with the world in a different way, to pursue Chinese interests outside of the system. And so now you see a competition between these two great powers that have become deeply economically entwined over the last 50 years. And now they're slowly decoupling. And around the world, you see China planting seeds for its new system, using state-backed money to invest in infrastructure projects all over the globe. This gives China a presence in many new countries, tying these countries to Chinese debt, which often translates into future leverage. In March 2023, China sent diplomats to the Middle East for the first major effort to broker a peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, these two bitter rivals. This is something that the U.S. couldn't do, and it showed the declining influence that the U.S. has on this region. But the U.S. still remains on top, and they will as long as they can control the economic and financial systems that the world operates on, which they do, for now. But China is challenging this as well, working with Brazil, Russia, India, and South Africa, or the BRICS countries, to develop an alternative economic bloc. These are all major growing economies, and they will only become more important in the next 2 decades. Since 2009, the BRICS countries have been stepping up their cooperation, meeting annually, creating a new development bank to invest in their countries, and coordinating on various policies. The BRICS countries are becoming a potential rival to the G7 countries, which represent the US-led order. BRICS countries are even discussing creating their own currency that they share between these 5 growing economies.
They're creating a secondary economy in the world, totally independent of the United States. We won't have to talk about sanctions in 5 years because there'll be so many countries transacting in currencies other than the dollar that we won't have the ability to sanction them.
This would be a major challenge to the US dollar, which is currently the standard for international trade, and a major reason why everyone has to play nice with the US. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a major pushback against the Western security and economic order, and it showed us which countries will fall on which side of that divide. You can see that most countries aren't taking a side here. They aren't siding with Russia and China or with the Western Bloc. You could call these the non-aligned countries, the undecided, the countries that China and the US will be looking to influence into their system in coming years. Let's highlight the 25 largest economies among these non-aligned countries, at least according to the Economist Intelligence Unit. These are the economies that the US is working to keep on their side, to keep in their system, and that China is trying to woo to join their new transactional system. But this Cold War is different than the last one, the one where the USA and the Soviet Union forced countries to deeply choose a side based on ideological convictions about capitalism versus communism. This new rising Cold War could be much less black and white. Instead, in this much more globalized and interconnected world, non-aligned countries will exploit this bidding war between the superpowers to get them the best trade and security deals possible. Like in Brazil, where this is already happening. Brazil is a massive country who is a super close ally with the United States. And yet, they're a part of the BRICS bloc with China, which is one reason Brazil refused to sell weapons to Ukraine when the country requested a deal. They're already walking this line between their interests that align with the US order and their interests that align with China. Brazil's president traveled to Beijing in April 2023, and not only did the Brazilian president sign around 20 new agreements on technology, trade, and agriculture, but he actually asked Beijing to help him negotiate the war in Ukraine. So even as the US and China cut ties, Brazil is showing that they're not going to take a side. They're going to play both sides to their own benefit. India is kind of doing the same thing, getting lots of cheap oil and nearly half of their weapons from Russia, and then getting a quarter of their weapons from Europe, and recently securing $200 billion in funding from the US for Indian technology startups. Saudi Arabia gets almost all of its weapons from the United States, but is